Welcome to Christ and Culture. My name is Pastor Jeff Short. Today we're going to be talking further about Christmas. We're in the Christmas season. We're past Christmas, but we're still in the tail end of the year, and we're going to cover the topic of Christmas and how it relates to our culture. The title of this broadcast is Christ and Culture, and we want to remember how important Christmas is to our culture. And I just was a part of a worship service on the Sunday after Christmas, and we sang hymns. We sang probably about 10 different Christian Christmas hymns, the traditional Christmas hymns. And it got me thinking about how important it is to have these Christmas hymns to sing. It's really important for our culture, because as our culture becomes more and more secularized, as our culture becomes more and more paganized and post-Christian, we begin to think about what the effects of this will be. What will be the effects of godlessness in our culture if our culture continues to go away from God more and more and more? What will be the effects of this? Well, we know what atheism leads to. It leads to pessimism, despair, a nihilistic view of life. It leads to hopelessness, and it basically promotes a this worldly, in other words, a materialistic view of life. And we know that if you have a society that's built on just this life and is built on just getting by materially and physically and socially and simply on the horizontal level, you're going to miss very important aspects of cultural life, because the spiritual aspect, the vertical aspect, the way we connect and relate to God, is so important. It's not only important, obviously, for the number one reason that is most apparent, and that is morality, but it's also important for just basic things like meaning and purpose and hope among our people in any population. And you could see what happened, for example, in communist Russia and the Soviet bloc countries of Eastern Europe. You see what happened when they tried to eliminate God and remove God from the public sphere. And actually all of society, they tried to remove God culturally. What happened is you found people pessimistic, in despair. It's a kind of a joke, but the vodka use during the communist years was astronomical. People needed something to get them through the day and get them through life, and they turned to alcohol, and they turned to vodka, and they turned to the things that you would use to sort of medicate yourself. And they needed to do that because they didn't have anywhere else to turn. And what a pathetic way of life is. You have to turn to drugs, you have to turn to alcohol, because you don't have any meaning and purpose in your life. Well, if you remove God, the core reality of existence, from the equation, then you're going to either have to come up with a way to deaden that emptiness inside of you, that deaden that darkness inside of you, or you're just going to perish, and people commit suicide. And we're seeing more suicides in our secular society because people don't have anywhere to turn to. If you take away God, if you remove the divine and the sacred from a person's life, they're simply going to perish. And that often takes the form of taking their own life. And so we see the rash of suicides appearing as our society heads into a secular direction. And so that's why Christmas as a holiday perhaps is even more important today than it ever has been before. You know, in the times past, people had more of a faith in God. They had more of a faith in the Christian understanding of reality. They read from the Bible more. They prayed. They attended church more on a regular basis. And so they had this resilience that comes from carrying out the rhythms and disciplines of Christianity. They had a toughness, a spiritual and mental toughness that people are lacking today. And they're lacking it because they don't have the Lord to fall back onto, because they have shut God out of their life. And so during these few times of the year, and Christmas is one of those few times where people actually turn back to God, at least if not just symbolically, then also physically and practically when they attend a church service. Now there's a running kind of a joke in Christian church circles among the clergy, and that is people show up at Christmas and Easter. In fact, there's a name for people who only attend Christmas and Easter, and that's C&E Christians, Christian who come only for Christmas and Easter, and then you never see them. And I used to, as a pastor, get frustrated and talk negatively towards C&E Christians or C&E people who would show up just at Christmas and Easter. And as I've matured and as I've gotten older, I don't talk as negative about them as I did. And the reason I don't is because I begin to take the attitude, well, at least they're here for these important holidays. And you have to give them that. You have to give them that credit. You have to recognize and encourage people, whether they're coming back to God, coming back to the faith, or whether they're just going through the motions of coming back to God. At least they're being exposed to the Christmas message. At least they're being exposed to Christianity. Now, what does that mean, they're being exposed to Christianity? Well, like I said before, I just got out of a Christmas Sunday service where it was a hymn sing, and we basically sang all of the old traditional Christmas hymns. There must have been about 10 of them that we sang. And it was really fantastic. And I started thinking as we were singing these hymns, if someone just sang the words of these hymns, if they just expressed what was written in these hymns, they would be basically articulating the meaning for the season, the reason for the season, Jesus Christ. Because these old hymns were written by faith-filled Christians, and when you sing these old hymns, you cannot help but be filled with some kind of faith. Now, you may not be a Christian personally, you may be a backslidden Christian, you may be a fallen away Christian, you may be a nominal Christian or a minimal Christian, or you may not even be a Christian. But when you sing those hymns, if the church leads you in singing those old hymns, you're going to be better off for it. And you might even be better off for singing those hymns than hearing some skeptical, unbelieving, liberal preacher trying to be hip and cool and scientific and with it and avant-garde and totally botch the sermon. But if you can sing the old great Christian hymns, you have gotten within yourself the true reason for the season. So we sang, for example, today we sang Silent Night, we sang O Little Town of Bethlehem, we sang Angels from the Realm of Glory, or Angels We Have Heard on High, we sang Joy to the World. I mean, all of these hymns, if you just sing them, it does your soul good. And now, if you take that on a cultural level and you have millions upon tens of millions of C and E Christians, or even C and E people. We won't even say that they're Christian. Some of these people are brought to the church because they happen to be in town and the family was going to church, so they drug them to church. Some people go to church once a year at Christmas time, or twice a year, Christmas and Easter, and they're going just simply out of rote. They're going just out of habit, or maybe they're just going to please someone they like or someone they love or their fiance. They're going to these events out of obligation or duty, but while they're there, they're being exposed to the reason for the season. And that has occurred millions and millions and millions of times during the Christmas season, whether they go to this Christmas cantata or they go to a nativity scene, living Christmas tree program, or a living passion play of Christ, or there's the Glory of Christmas that's performed in lots of different seeker-sensitive churches, whether it's some local, small Christmas play put on by the members of the church that is actually pretty bad as far as theatrics and drama go. It really doesn't matter. If they're a part of that and they're being exposed to the Christmas message and they're being exposed to the truths of the gospel and what the biblical narrative is teaching, they are benefiting from that. And that is a good thing in our culture. I talked about earlier that how Christianity has declined in its influence in our society, and how today, more than ever, Christmas is more important, because this may be the one time that people actually tune in to the message of Christianity and hear something or feel something or experiencing something of the reality of God. Now, that's a sad commentary on our culture, but if that's the reality we live in, we have to deal with that. I mean, we can all say, gee, I wish it weren't the case that people were abandoning the faith. I wish it weren't the case that our culture is apostatizing from the Christian worldview. I wish it weren't the case that things are as they are in our secularized, godless, spiritualist society. But they are that way, and so we have to deal with that. And one of the great things about Christmas time is that people, godless, pagan, unbelieving, even atheistic people, are dragged into churches or just go out of politeness to their mother, father, loved ones, family, wife, husband. They go to these Christmas programs and they go to these hymn sings and they go to these Christian church service around Christmas time, and they really get some spiritual benefit out of it, even though they won't admit it. That's so great. Here are these atheists singing these Christian songs, Christmas songs and hymns, and they're going along because somebody invited them there and they didn't want to decline, because they wanted to be polite and they wanted to be a good friend. And so they're going along and they're singing these Christmas songs and they don't even believe it, but something is happening inside of them, perhaps that will draw them close to God at some other point. So they're getting all of this theology in them. And usually these older hymns have really good and solid theology. Now, some of the newer hymns that are out there are all about experience. I feel this and I feel that, and I saw the light, and this and that and the other. They're all about the person. But those older hymns, and sometimes they're criticized for being too theologically rich, too, say, intellectual, too abstract, because they contain theology. as opposed to today where we have an abundance of experientialism and sharing one's feelings in music. The old hymns had the theology. And if you wanted to expose someone to the truth of God, you would want to expose them to the old Christmas hymns. For example, joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. The Lord has come. So you go through these verse after verse after verse and get the picture here. These secular pagan people come into the church at Christmas time, and they go and they sing these hymns. They sing the words, these spiritual Christmas words in the old hymns, and it gets into them. And maybe the tune gets into them. Now, I know a lot of people don't like to admit that, I don't, these are old songs. I'm only up on the hip songs. I like the cool songs. I like the songs written in the last 3-4 years, possibly anything over 5 years is a golden oldie, that kind of an attitude. They won't admit it, but these songs actually can get inside of you because they're catchy. Like that song I mentioned, Joy to the World, the Lord is come. That's pretty catchy. And when these hymns were written originally, and when the churches began to sing these hymns, it was like wildfire. It spread everywhere. Why? Because the power of music to communicate a message. Well, that power is still there in those hymns. And most of those hymns are golden opportunities to actually share the faith with a skeptical age that we live in, and do so in a way that isn't confrontational and isn't intimidating, where the people are not going automatically in debate mode as if you were to try to discuss something with someone. If you were to sit down with an atheist or an agnostic or a skeptic or a secular person or a pagan person who does not believe the gospel, if you were to discuss with them and witness to them, they might just start arguing with you because you're going at a purely intellectual level. But if they sing a hymn and they begin to get into the music and they begin to internalize the words of that hymn, there is the opportunity for some bit of truth, some little nugget, some little diamond in the rough to get into their minds and their hearts and into their emotions, and that might actually produce more good than if you were to sit down with them one-on-one and try to convert them intellectually to the faith. And so this is one of the great things about the Christmas season that we have to thank God for. We need to pray every year as this time rolls around that God would use the Christmas activities that are everywhere and let His light shine through these activities. Now, there is a big problem in our society today, and that is the problem of the secularization of Christmas. And there's no question that that is indeed happening. The secularization of Christmas is a reality, no question. If you look at, for example, the songs on the radio, if you go back 50 years ago, 90% of the songs on the radio would be Christian Christmas hymns and Christmas theologically sound songs. But nowadays, if you tune into one of those all Christmas stations and just listen to the music that they play 24/7 for the week of Christmas, for example, you will get a majority of those songs are now secular Christmas songs. And what I mean by secular is just mentioning the word Christmas in a song, I guess, nowadays makes it a Christmas song. And I can think of examples right off the top of my head, one after the other. For example, Last Christmas. So This Is Christmas by John Lennon, and on and on and on. It's just, all you have to do is just put the word Christmas in your song, and it's now played at Christmas time. Or All I Want for Christmas Is You. That's another one. Mariah Carey's famous hit. And you go on and on and on. Now, there are some classic Christmas songs that don't have the Christmas message of Christianity in them. For example, White Christmas, I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. That used to be the vast minority of songs sung around Christmas. Now, that kind of a secularized Christmas song is the majority. And so that's just one example of the secularization of Christmas. So, as Christians, we need to then emphasize the Christmas season and its true spiritual meaning. And that's why we need to pray for all the churches that have Christmas cantatas, Christmas hymn sings. We need to pray for Christmas programs at churches. We need to pray that people continue to write good, solid Christian Christmas songs. We need to pray that producers produce Christian Christmas movies and Christmas TV shows and specials where the real traditional hymns are sung. And we need to pray that the real meaning of Christmas never, ever gets buried under this load of secular garbage that we have in our culture. Now, that doesn't mean that as Christians we need to be Grinches, the Grinch that stole Christmas. We don't go around and try to steal away from our culture every single shred of non-Christian tradition. We don't have to be that way. We don't have to be like a Scrooge and say bah humbug about the Christmas tree, or bah humbug about Frosty the Snowman. We don't have to be negative about all the non-Christian traditions that have sprung up in our culture. But we do have to be aware that there is a danger in our culture that the traditional, real meaning of Christmas can be lost. And so we need to continually buck the trend of secularism and bring people back to the Bible. Bring people back to the true Christmas celebration. And as Christians, we need to focus on the true celebration of Christmas and not get distracted. We need to make sure we're not distracted so that we can lead the culture back to the true meaning of Christmas. But it's so important. Christmas every year. Can you imagine where our secular culture would be if we didn't have Christmas every year? To renew, at least on a minimal level, Christmas. Can you imagine the dark, despairing negativity there would be? The secularism that would be overwhelming us in our culture if it weren't for the Christmas season? We in the United States celebrate this, and of course, as Christians, we complain about the secular encroachment on the real meaning of Christmas. But again, we have to also not become negative. We need to bring out the positives and say, well, there are positive things that the secular world does. When the secular world holds a Christmas celebration, it usually does include a few of the traditional Christmas hymns, just simply out of tradition's sake. And we need to thank God for that, because that's an opening. And we need to also tell people, whether they're Christian or not, we need Christmas. Now, I know there was a time in this country where Christmas wasn't really celebrated with much enthusiasm. Well, that's a historical oddity. That's a reaction against this kind of excessive revelry and celebration that was taking place in Europe at the time. And so faithful biblical Christians reacted against that drunkenness, that revelry, that wild partying that took place, that was anything but Christian. And people were just using anything as an excuse to go out and get drunk and act wild, and they weren't really celebrating God, and they weren't really celebrating Jesus. They were just using the church's official holiday as a time to cut loose. And faithful biblical Christians realize, hey, that is not good. I mean, our equivalent could be a wild office party under the guise of Christmas celebration. No, you don't celebrate with a wild office party the birth of Jesus Christ. It's inappropriate. Office parties are okay, but if everybody's getting drunk and there are naked ladies brought in for the occasion, or there are people wearing outfits that are inappropriate and immoral, and on and on and on, then wild, raucous party going, that is not appropriate for Christmas. Now, that was taking place in a different form in Europe, and the Puritans, for example, rejected that. When they came to the U.S., there was that negative attitude toward Christmas. But today, we can celebrate Christmas and we don't have to throw it out. We don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Christmas actually can be a good thing if it's done in moderation, if it's done appropriately, if it's kept spiritual. So I would encourage all of us to reflect on these things, to thank God for Christmas, take advantage of this spiritual, truly spiritual holiday that's still recognized in society, and by no means reject it because of the bad things that are also included in it. So I hope that that's helped you in this discussion. I hope that you've had a Merry Christmas this year. Hope that you've been able to celebrate the real meaning of the season. And we'll see you back next week on another program of Christ in Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short. God bless.